Hey, welcome in, everybody. It's Basketball by Association. We've got basketballs, we've got associations, we've got me. I'm Joel Cordes. We're joined today by Matt Dagostino, filling in for Arky Shea. Matt, at this time, you're a longtime repeat guest, and we're lucky to have you. Thanks for coming back, my friend.
Hey, I feel like I need to be filling out paperwork here to become a regular on the show here. I like it, though. I appreciate you having me back.
We always appreciate it, and we're going to get into the trade deadline preview update type of show, all the rumors that are out there. We'll talk about a certain Kyrie Irving whose ears must have perked up and went, wait, there's a news cycle happening and I'm not part of it? Get my people on the phone, because he's back in the news cycle, as you probably have heard. So we'll talk about him, but we're also going to look at the teams that have to make a deal here at the deadline, where it really should be non-negotiable at this point. We'll take a look at the teams that maybe probably should or could do something, and players that need a change of scenery. But before we do that, as always, it's episode 133. There's only one player in NBA history who has logged 133 career playoff games. So we've only got one choice, but it is a good one. It will require a little bit of guessing, but I don't want to say it's one of the easier ones. This is definitely down the middle, because it's a fairly well-known player, just maybe not for the kid generation.
Okay. I like
He's
the
a
challenge.
Hall of Famer. He's a 4-time All-Star. He's a 5-time All-Defensive player. He's a longtime Philadelphia 76er. In fact, logged 11 seasons with them. He was a 1983 NBA champ. So that will hone us in just a little bit. Wound down his career with the Spurs, a couple years with the Knicks, did a season with the Hawks, and a season with the New Jersey Nets after that. Interestingly enough, he is a Hall of Famer, despite never averaging more than 15 points per game.
Wow.
4-time All-Star, and averaged 15 points twice, 13 points once, and got into the All-Star game with 12.5 points and 7 assists. But there's another stat that really stands out that got him into the All-Star game that year, despite those incredibly low numbers that would never fly today.
Uh-oh. This is difficult. This is difficult. The first name, and I don't think it's a good one. Mo Cheeks was the first guy that popped in.
It's Mo Cheeks.
It is it. Oh,
it's Mo Cheeks, yeah. His first All-Star appearance as a 26-year-old, 1982-83, gets in 12.5 points per game, 7 assists, but was averaging over 2 steals a game. And I think the name had been out there for a little bit, because he had been averaging almost 2.5 steals per game since he came into the league. So building that reputation around defense, did get 3 more All-Star appearances. But yeah, career averages, not what you would really expect out of a Hall of Famer. 11 points, 6.7 assists, but 2 steals per game. And the championship.
You got guys who got snubbed this week from an All-Star, not averaging 27 a game, and couldn't find an All-Star spot.
We could, and of course, lots of people have dedicated whole shows to how De'Aaron Fox and Anthony Edwards and a few of those other guys got ripped off. But it's the same argument every year, because there's just not enough spots. And I do think that as the league scoring averages go up, team-wise and pace, the individual scoring numbers are so bloated that you look back at a guy like Mo Cheeks and go, whoa, but he got into the All-Star game. How come this guy isn't? It's like, it's different, man.
It's a completely different game. And I've heard the argument of, well, expand the rosters so that, some more of these guys get in. Then I think you kind of cheapen the accomplishment of getting in. I think I like where it's at. There's going to be people, no matter whether you have 12-man rosters, 15-man rosters, whatever, there are going to be people that think they should be in that don't end up getting.
All right, let's do it. It's trade deadline time. The Mo Cheeks episode is off and rolling. It's Kyrie Irving, and Kyrie Irving has reportedly, although it seems to be very sound reporting at this point, demanded a trade from the Brooklyn Nets, and he was going to hit free agency. The Nets were not going to offer him a max contract. Maybe they were going to bring him back on a reasonable deal. You and I have talked about that before, just of him and Durant have played well together when they've actually been together. It's not like there's much of a market out there as far as we know. This reeks to me, Matt, of Carmelo Anthony style timing, when he demanded a trade from the Denver Nuggets to the New York Knicks. And if he would have just waited, he could have gone to the Knicks without them gutting their team and been in a much better position. But he wanted his birthday cake. He wanted to eat it too. Kyrie, if he wanted to leave, could have just waited without tanking his trade value by once again being erratic, enigmatic, and completely cut off from reality. And by the way, I'm the Kyrie apologist on this show. It's Arky who truly dislikes him, except for he admits he's a really good ball player on the court. I try to be the apologist. I'm running out of apologies.
And so you look at this Kyrie situation, and it's almost exactly what you said, Joel. We had kind of turned a corner here. We had gotten to a point where Kyrie's playing the best basketball, maybe complete basketball of his entire career right now with KD out of the lineup. And he gets voted an all-star starter. So he's one of the top 2 most popular guards in the Eastern Conference, which if you think at it from an owner's perspective or a team perspective, if you're saying, do we want Kyrie Irving on our team? The fans clearly have not soured on him, which is very surprising, I think, to see in an all-star voting scenario like that. But
incredibly, but being in the New York market, just like being in the LA market, does not hurt come all-star fan voting time.
Definitely not. But you would think out of the people who would be most tired of this by now, it would be those people.
That's true.
Whether it's because you're a Knicks fan and he spurned you along with KD a couple years ago, or you're a Nets fan and you're saying we're tired of this. But you get to a point, and you mentioned his value's diminished a little because now he's come out here. So Brooklyn, on one hand, could be jumping up and down saying we could be a week of the whole situation, and saying, well, are we going to get pennies a dollar or close to his amounts?
Man, it's almost like Kyrie's foot started itching and his mouth got a little hungry, and he's like, I can put these two together again. I haven't learned my lesson. There was a corner being turned. There was a redemption arc being had here. Things were good, and it must have been too good. Yeah, the Nets had dropped some games, but there was the Kevin Durant excuse, and Kyrie was playing himself, I think, back into a lot of good graces with just staying focused on the court. Like you said, being a winning player, being part of what was here. And for this right now, under these circumstances, there is the alternative thought that maybe this is about him trying to leverage his way into the max deal with Brooklyn, but it already sounds like they're pretty adamant not to give him that, and for good reason. But there would have been a market, and there probably still will be a market. We've had different teams like the Lakers who've been rumored for a while, but now Dallas gets into it. Miami's part of the usual suspects. Phoenix might be in there. But anybody who deludes themselves into thinking that a change of scenery is going to change Kyrie Irving for the better and that we're going to be able to corral this into something predictable, he's left a wake now of 3 different franchises that have really tried to cater to him. You can make the case that maybe the Cavs were so LeBron-centric that not, but that have tried to cater to him. And what really sucks about this situation, Matt, is it's not like you have a superstar player who got traded somewhere, maybe wasn't crazy about it, but they gave it their best and said, I want out. This is a guy who cried about wanting his birthday cake immediately, and then was allowed to eat it before dinner, took 2 bites and started crying that he didn't like the birthday cake.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's never ending, it's seemingly. And I'm even shocked that, even if this is a negotiation ploy, I'm even shocked that the Nets are in negotiating mood at this point. Like, you're almost done. You got half a season at most with it, and then you guys can go your separate ways and wish the best of luck to each other. The fact that they are even considering, reportedly, talking about some sort of deal with Kyrie for him to stay there is a revelation unto itself to me.
It's also a testament, I think, too, that this has been a good half of the season, right? It has been a good redemption arc. Not enough to erase the concerns. They're not going to hand him a max deal. They've said that, but enough to go, okay, maybe we could, maybe we could make this work. So that's less surprising to me that they would at least be talking about it. But what's the market now? You talk about those teams. but you're not only getting, and I hate to use this because it used to be so overused for guys that didn't deserve it. It's not a term we use in the modern NBA. It's not very politically correct. But at this point, Kyrie Irving is the modern definition of an NBA head case, a term that used to get thrown around a ton. So you're bringing in a guy like that with a well-earned reputation for being enigmatic, unpredictable, player first, not team first, whatever you want to use. And to make it worse, he's playing at a super high level, so the price is not going to be a buy low sort of thing. But he also is the very definition of a rental candidate, where because it's Kyrie and you don't know what he's going to do, he could decide to go play basketball in Tibet next year or not play basketball at all, or who knows?
It's interesting, but I think the fact that he's in the final year of a deal helps as far as his market is concerned. There are plenty of teams who would sign up for 4 months of Kyrie Irving to see what the talent can bring them and try to swing for the fences on a championship run. I think there are plenty of teams to do that. I think the more interesting side of it is, where does Brooklyn want to go with this? Their draft capital has been decimated by James Harden deals and everything else that they've done to try to build around KD and Durant. So do they want to get back some draft picks that will lower the return on their actual talent in return? Or do they want to try and go for something? KD could be back as soon as next week and certainly wants to play in the All-Star game and beyond. So, do they try and go for it in a Eastern Conference that is pretty tough, but they have been, when healthy, one of those teams in the mix? So you could go a lot of different ways. You could go the route of the Lakers, where you pretty much know what you're going to get back from the Lakers. The only things that they have to deal are Russell Westbrook and those 2 first-rounders in 27 and 29. So that's an option if you want to go that route. The Lakers have been rumored to be interested forever. So, you could do that. You mentioned Dallas, who is now, as much as I've said to you, I love the fact that it's Luka and the Pips. They are looking for another star to pair with him now. I don't know that the return you're getting for him from them is that great. I mean, you're looking at a Christian Wood expiring deal. You're looking at, Davis Bertans. They're trying to unload that contract. The best young talent they have is Josh Green, who has been playing well in that system, but is largely an unknown to the rest of the league.
I've heard Spencer Dinwiddie coming back to Brooklyn, plus Dorian Finney-Smith, which, I mean, maybe if Durant is fully healthy, you get a little bit of a boost there, but it's not what you're giving up in Kyrie. But I don't like that for Dallas either. I don't like getting rid of either of those guys.
Not particularly. To me, you mentioned them. To me, this fits both teams pretty well with Brooklyn and Phoenix. To me, we've heard the talks of Chris Paul maybe on the outs with Phoenix. They're trying to rediscover their magic that they've had the last couple years before the Western Conference Finals last season. And they need some sort of shakeup. Obviously, you've got Devin Booker, and he should be coming back healthy soon as well. They signed DeAndre Ayton to the long-term deal, but they're not overly enthused necessarily with that. The Jay Crowder situation has been hanging over their heads all season long. He's going somewhere at some point before the trade deadline is over. So is it a Chris Paul and Jay Crowder for Kyrie Irving thing? That has some traction to me. I don't know the interest level on either side, but as far as a fit for both teams, it allows Brooklyn to still compete because it's not like they're trying to tank their way down anywhere, because they don't have any picks coming back to them.
Right.
But you get Chris Paul, one of the best leaders in the game. His talent is still there, but maybe the legs, the body's not holding up as much over the last season or two. But you get Chris Paul and Jay Crowder back to mix in with KD and Nick Claxton, who is one of my favorites for most improved player this year, and the rest of the guys they have there. There's something to that. I think that's a viable option if the Nets want to try to go in that direction.
Two thoughts there. The Nets could also go with plan D, which is none of the above, and bluff this the same way they called the bluff on Kevin Durant and didn't do anything and just let it be, though you do run the high risk then of seeing both players leaving for nothing. But they're already kind of in that gambit, and the trade, as you mentioned, like you're not going to get the full value back of what you gave up to get Kyrie. So there's that thought. However, Phoenix is intriguing. I will say this. If I'm James Jones and the front office in Phoenix, and I'm willing to take Kyrie Irving back into a situation that's been pretty dysfunctional over the last season now for a lot of different things, the Robert Sarver situation, all of this stuff going on. I'm looking as hard as possible to get DeAndre Ayton out. I can have one enigma on a roster. I can't have two. And DeAndre Ayton has been nowhere near as inconsistent or whatever as Kyrie Irving, but there's been some seed sown there of mutual distrust that has kind of bled into the rest of the season, even though Ayton's numbers look good. I got to move him if I'm bringing Kyrie in, even if it is turning out to just be a rental or just a look-see type of move. The Suns seem to be at a crossroads here where they had a window. The window was a lot smaller than we thought, but we knew it kind of hinged somewhat around Chris Paul. Some unforeseen circumstances. I don't want Irving and Ayton in the same locker room.
So that's a completely valid point. And even as you had extended the invitation to come on, and I'm looking at, what we're talking about and everything, I've been overheating the trade machine online the last few days, only to expedite that process with Kyrie's news yesterday. So I offer you this and tell me if you think this is a situation to where Phoenix can kind of play in two different worlds here over the next year or so. You get rid of Chris Paul and Jay Crowder. You bring in Kyrie, who's on an expiring deal. I agree with your assessment of Ayton and Kyrie kind of being a volatile situation. A team that I think, and we'll talk about later, that needs to make some sort of move along with Phoenix is Chicago.
Okay.
DeAndre Ayton, Nikola Vucevic, also on an expiring deal. And you make the money where I think Kobe White is probably the most likely scenario. So now if you were to bring in Kyrie and Vucevic to give you a big three of sorts with Devin Booker, we've talked about when, in the history of big threes, one of those guys has to sacrifice. I think it's very clearly Vucevic who would be in that role. And Vucevic is playing great over the last month or so. In January, he averaged 20 and 13. So he is playing better than he has throughout most of his Bulls tenure. But I think you could salvage a season and try to make a run with that group. And then at the end of the year, if it doesn't work or you don't want to go in that direction, you've cleared out the Ayton money that's long-term, and you have reset the books a bit by getting out of Kyrie's money, getting out of Vucevic's money. And we know Phoenix is a free agent destination. So we know for all sorts of reasons, the weather, the team is good, the coaching staff is good. And am I right? No state tax in Arizona also? I think that's also,
I'm not sure on them. Yeah, I know of Texas and Florida. I'm not sure on Arizona.
So there's a lot of things to like about Phoenix. I don't think they would have problems bringing in a star or two with the money they'd have available, with Devin Booker and Monty Williams as a great core to build from. I think that would be a very interesting situation where I think Phoenix could kind of dance on two dance floors and say, let's go for it this year. What we have now isn't really working. Let's try and change it up a bit. And if it doesn't work, we figure something out, over the summer with the money and cap space that we've got.
I love it for all of the reasons you just mentioned. That's fantastic trade machine work, by the way. I don't love it for the fact that is a terrible defensive group, big three wise, but you still have Mikal Bridges in the mix. You still have Torrey Craig. You've got some of the other wing defenders that have been passable there. So you're going to really reconfigure what they were trying to do or what the identity around the team was. But I guess that's what shuffling the deck is all about, right?
Well, and you still got Jay Crowder in that scenario. You still got Jay Crowder to trade away for now. Yes, I get the irony that Jay Crowder.
If you're going Crowder and Paul for Kyrie, you don't have Crowder to trade.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry. I was going to say the irony of all this is that Jay Crowder is that perfect wing defender.
That would have been the irony all year, right?
Yes.
When Cam Johnson went down and some of these other things, like, okay, Jay, you get your starting spot back. If that was the issue, you get it back, and he would have gotten it back after like game 8 in the regular season.
It seems easy from the outside looking in on that one, but defense may be a bit of a concern. I do like Mikal Bridges as a great wing defender. I think Cam Johnson is improved in that regard as well. There is some lack there, but even Kyrie's playing a little defense these days too with everything that's been going on. So I think it's an option. I think it's a good way for them to try something different, because I don't think what's going on right now is set up for any sort of deep playoff run.
Let's talk a few other teams. Any on your list of have to make a move, cannot sit this one out? We've heard rumors that this may be a very quiet trade deadline. We've heard that it feels like for the last 3 years or so. Some of that is cap related and just the way teams have been set up. This is a year, though, where it's being mentioned how many teams are still in play-in territory. You've got a lot of parity in the middle class of the NBA right now, which is a good thing unless you're a trade deadline junkie like myself and love all the different moves. But to me, I've got 3 to 4 teams that I feel like cannot stand pat. I wanted to pick your brain first if there's anybody on that list.
I have 4 teams also that need to do things for different reasons. And just to illustrate, 4th place in the Western Conference and 13th place in the Western Conference, separated by 3 games right now. So I actually happen to think there's going to be a lot of action this time around. The other thing is, if you look at next year's free agent crop, it's not the greatest.
No.
A lot of the bigger names are ones like LeBron, who will, either stay put in LA or he's going to decide, like, I'm going here. Here's where we're going to do. So it's not like there are a lot of bidding wars set up for the summer. It's a lot of Chris Middleton. It's a lot of Kristaps Porzingis. It's those kind of guys, or it's the restricted guys who you just can't see the team that they're on now not matching something to keep them. So I think that's also a perspective of, maybe this is a better time to make some moves than the summertime. Obviously, so many things come up in the summertime that we never even anticipate. But Phoenix was probably my number 1 team in terms of need to do something. So we discussed that. And the Lakers we've touched on. I think as long as LeBron James is on that roster, they're in go for it mode. So the 27 and 29 first round picks that are probably the most valuable first round picks available these days, I think should be open to discussion there. And as well as they have kind of righted the ship here a little bit, and Russ is playing decent. LeBron playing out of his mind. AD's back now, and he's been good when he's been in the lineup. I think there's obviously something there that they need to add. So whether it's Kyrie, whether it's something else, it feels like they should be making a move this week.
I want to ask you real quick in a minute or less, just because we haven't had a chance to touch on it on this show. Since Rui Hachimura got traded from the Wizards to the Lakers, did you like that deal? What do you think he brings? Does it move the needle at all for a Lakers team? Like you said, that is playing better, but it's still 3 games under 500 and out of the play-in right now in a Western Conference that, like you said, has a lot of open doors to climb in, and the Lakers still haven't been able to do that.
The team above the Lakers right now in the Western Conference, directly above them, is New Orleans, who has lost 10 in a row now. So they are certainly alive in the play-in conversation, or maybe even a top 6 spot. That's not out of the realm for any of these teams yet. But Hachimura is building around the margins. I think it's a good deal. It improves their roster. Kendrick Nunn and a couple of second rounders doesn't hurt the current roster either. And Hachimura brings some youth, brings some length, brings some energy. It's not, going to be the blockbuster deal of the trade deadline, but it's an incremental improvement for them where honestly, I think they've lacked in some of those moves over the last couple of years. The other pieces they've brought in have not come to fruition like they thought they would. So I think it adds a different element to that team that they didn't have before. So I'm fine with it.
Heading over to the Eastern Conference, where the number 4 seed is 11 games above 500. The West, as you mentioned, the 4th seed is 3 games above 500. That tells you the difference in disparity a little bit. On my list, the Atlanta Hawks. They were a darling a couple seasons ago. They got the sophomore slump, the dreaded sophomore slump last year, where people were looking for them at that point. There was no surprise. There was some dysfunction. But there was still the idea last year that there was a fair amount of injuries, that maybe they, again, needed a little more maturing, so you wanted to keep the group relatively together. They didn't find the John Collins deal that they wanted. They bring in DeJounte Murray to the backcourt. That was supposed to solve all of the problems that Trae Young might have. Those two do work really well together. It is a fun backcourt. There is something there, but Atlanta sitting 27-26, ultimately no better than they were last year in what was the dysfunctional, disappointing year. I don't think internal improvement right now can be a given, and you've got to shake the deck somehow. You did it with Murray during the offseason. This looks like the type of roster that you got to keep rolling now a little bit and reshuffling until you find something that sticks around Trae, or we're going to have a bigger conversation about whether you can build around Trae. We're not there yet, but 1 to 2 seasons from now of shuffling, that's the shelf life in the NBA.
Sure. I think that shuffling starts with John Collins. Again, they gave him the deal. And at this point, I wouldn't be surprised to see him, like DeAndre Ayton, be Blake Griffined and sign a long-term deal and then be shipped out on the first year of that long-term deal. But he seems disgruntled. He and Trae Young have not gelled the way that they had hoped they would. And he seems like an obvious guy who's got potential, as a solid guy at the very least to have in the lineup. I think he's somebody who could very well be on the move if Atlanta wants to go in that direction. The other thing is that coaching situation where Nate McMillan and Trae Young have not seen eye to eye for quite some time now. And we've seen rumors of Nate McMillan was almost ready to walk out on the team in the middle of this season. So I don't know how much of it Atlanta thinks they can do by tweaking the roster or by tweaking the coaching staff. But I think if they do something there, John Collins is the main piece going elsewhere.
This is a spoiler alert for a different team and a different deal that's coming up. But a buddy of mine who's a Timberwolves fan as well, we're convinced that Towns needs to go. You and I have talked about this. Based on what we're seeing with Anthony Edwards playing without Towns and the joy that's been there, the progression, seeing Rudy Gobert be serviceable, not worth what he was brought in for, and having that sinking pit in our stomach going, Walker Kessler might be better today than Rudy Gobert is today, but Gobert is serviceable. You can still get something from Towns. I look at Atlanta and I say, based on what we've got in Minnesota, would I take John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, one of the young guys in a pick? And would I be okay with that for Towns at this point? Towns' value probably has dropped quite a bit. You could maybe talk me into that. I don't know how you feel about that sort of thing, but to me, if I were Atlanta, I would take that and run in a heartbeat at this point.
Who are the guys you said sending back from Atlanta? It was one of the young guys, DeAndre Hunter and Collins?
Collins, DeAndre Hunter, a young guy in a pick. I would take it.
The first thing I look at is, are you going to feel good about having Towns and Capella in the same starting lineup? I don't know how well it hasn't worked out great for Minnesota, the way that works out. And the other thing with me is Towns, to me, and we've talked about this, with the Minnesota roster, maybe not the best leader, maybe not the most mentally tough player in the NBA. I don't know whether, and I have a tough time gauging Trae Young in that department. On the one hand, when he is bowing at the Garden as he eliminates the Knicks, it's like, wow, this guy's got ice in his veins. This guy knows what it's like to be in the moment. And then you see some of this stuff where he's bickering with Nate McMillan, and you're like, I don't have a great read on that. If Atlanta doesn't think he is a a leader off the court as well as on the court. I don't know that I want to pair him with Towns, where now your two best players are maybe not lead by example kind of guys. So I don't know how I feel about that. To me, one of the other teams I've looked at, Chicago, Atlanta said to be interested in DeMar DeRozan.
Mm-hmm.
I could see Chicago is one of those teams I think needs to either reshuffle or strip it completely down at this point. But if they decide to reshuffle, they could do a John Collins and other stuff for a DeMar DeRozan kind of move there, where I think DeRozan can be that leader by example. I think he could fit in well. He works the mid-range. Trey's working the outside. I think there's a way to kind of mold that roster in there as well if DeRozan were to come back and something like that. That's kind of where I'm at with John Collins. And again, I don't know anywhere that John Collins goes. I don't think they're like, yes, this is the missing piece. I think he is a piece. For money's sake, I don't know that any team trading away for John Collins is maybe looking at that as the final piece to the puzzle.
That was the problem when he signed that contract. And I know I was not alone in saying that, of going, now he's getting paid to be a 1 or a 2, but he's clearly a 3 or a 4 as far as wheels go on a really good team. There's nothing wrong with being a 3 or a 4. You need that. But when that expectation of the money comes and the inability to fit you into a cap structure, it was a misfire on Atlanta's part, but it's been well documented. They didn't have a whole lot of choices in there either and kind of had to pay that out. A team that's also misfired plenty of times, really inexplicably to me in the coaching department, but now is at a place where they're on the list of have to do something here, not to save the season, but to strip it down and to understand that where you're going is nowhere. This is the Charlotte Hornets, who have been on this list multiple times before over the last 10 years. The Steve Clifford return, I didn't understand at all. We talked about that last show, Archie and I did, but you look at this roster, it's sprinkled with helpful veterans at this point. Terry Rozier probably at the top of the list. Gordon Hayward, teams are gonna shy away from because of the money and the injuries, but still could be helpful in the right situation. PJ Washington, I love. Mason Plumlee could work somewhere, not as a needle mover by any means, but just a roster filler. And there's a few other young guys. Kelly Oubre would be probably at the top of the list if his hand wasn't hurt. Sounds like it could be severely enough that he's going to miss some time. So something's got to happen there, because you are running the risk of making this look completely incompetent to the point that LaMelo Ball gets eyes elsewhere as soon as his contract is up.
Yes, I mean, I would say they are officially on the clock for LaMelo Ball at this point, of trying to show him that they want to build around him and they can get him better pieces moving forward. To me, though, Charlotte matches up really well with the Lakers if they want that Russell Westbrook trade, because, to me, the best deal going into the season for the Lakers when they were trying to deal Westbrook was the Miles Turner, Buddy Hield deal with Indiana. I thought that matched up really well. And those are two really good players, but they are supplemental pieces that fit the needs of what they wanted to try to accomplish. Buddy Hield gives them the shooting around LeBron that they want. Miles Turner is another guy with size who can also play on the perimeter, a very good shooting big man, but also great defensively to kind of balance out with Anthony Davis as they try to figure out, is Davis the 5? Is he going to buy into that, or is he still a 4? I thought that was a really good move for them. So trading Russ for Hayward and Rozier gets them some of that shooting, maybe a little bit more volume than they would like. And then Gordon Hayward, you mentioned, if he can be healthy and contribute as a piece, I think he can have some value to them. And for the Hornets, they take Russ on for the rest of the year, then clear that money, and their cap room looks much better moving forward as they try to build around LaMelo.
I've got one other have to move team, and then we'll grab some of the could, should, would type of things. This one pains me to say it, but I have been saying it for a year and a half now. The Portland Trail Blazers rebuilt around Dame. They got a really nice starting 5 on paper. It's been a revolving door injury-wise, which was kind of expected given the group. The bench is a work in progress, to put it nicely. They have looked competitive at times. They've dropped a bunch of games that they shouldn't. They also, as I said, missed injury, but 26-26, sitting in 10th place. We just literally said it 5 minutes ago. You can only reshuffle so many times before you have to blow it up. I know Dame wants to play the good soldier route, just like Brad Beal wants to do over in Washington, and more power to him. But if Portland is going to commit to Dame as a career Blazer, there's honor in that. That's fine. Do you keep reshuffling here at the deadline, or did you just let this play out and let the bench guys take their lumps and figure out what you got? Because to me, you make a deal.
The hard part is Dame has played the part of the good soldier. He's also taking max money. And now his salary is in the $50 to $60 million range by the time his contract is up. So how much can you really build around that when you have so much invested in just one player? Makes it very difficult. And I think they've tried to do it, and you have to do it around the margins. It's very difficult to do it getting star players in there. So they've gotten the best they could, with the money they've had to work with. Jeremy Grant is a really good piece, but he's a third or fourth piece. He is having to play like the second piece right now. It just makes it very difficult. You said you've been trying for a year and a half. I've maybe 3, 4, 5 seasons I've said they should have done this. Certainly after McCollum goes, no excuse to not try it then. And certainly he would shift the balance somewhere if he gets traded. But I just don't see it happening. I think everybody is being too nice to the other party and not wanting to ruffle feathers and to honor things on their end of the deal. And it's just not working out on the floor.
Finding a deal that makes sense for the Blazers in that type of reshuffle and a dance partner that can take on Dame and give you the draft capital you want back to really strip it down. Dame really needs to get traded for another superstar at this point. So there's a couple of teams that you mentioned of maybe stripping it to the studs, but they're the type of teams that is Dame really landing in a better situation than Portland? Not necessarily. Indiana's got some pieces at this point. Utah's got some pieces at this point. There's a few others, but that's Portland all over again. The one that's kind of intriguing to me, I don't know that they would do it. I would love to see them do it, is Denver, sitting first in the Western Conference. Would I give up Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., and whatever else I needed in order to seal the deal? Absolutely 110% I would. And if I was Dame Lillard, I would be thrilled to do that. If I was Nikola Jokic, I would be thrilled to have that, because that pairs with everything that Jokic isn't, which is only a few things. But in crunch time, Jokic wants to set somebody up. Dame wants those shots. It's what makes the Jamal Murray Jokic pairing a really nice one. Yeah.
Dame time. That's playoff time.
Yeah.
He wants. Yeah. I was never good at meteorology in college because I never knew which way to point, but it's right there. Yeah, that hadn't been on my radar, but that's a good deal for both teams, because I think the Denver Nuggets are missing something by not having a true second star on that team. I think Dame clearly gives them that. Even if it's not as much, I don't know what the draft capital would be going to Portland, but Michael Porter Jr. he's on a long-term deal now, but that's young talent that could become premium talent down the road. And Jamal Murray, he's looked pretty good after the ACL. He's come back strong. And he's obviously somebody who, gosh, he's not a star, but he's really, really good. That makes a heck of a lot of sense for both sides, if it ever came to that for Portland and Denver.
All right, you heard it here first, everybody. Basketball by association. Put us on the radar for that.
I love it.
Let's talk teams that could, would, should make a move. Maybe they won't, but it would probably be in their best interest. Anybody on your list here in the middle class? I got a couple.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned Chicago. I think they could retool and trade any one of the DeRozan, Levine, Vucevic guys.
Mm-hmm.
I could see a scenario where all three of them go.
Wow.
And I don't think they're going to do it. I don't know that they're going to trade any of them, which I think would be a disappointment. But you could trade those guys, and you're left with whatever you get back plus Alex Caruso and Patrick Williams to kind of figure out where to go from there.
Mhm.
The other one to me is Toronto, who I
Yep.
think could help out a lot of teams, and would also be wise to get rid of some of these guys and get back guys with a little more contract stability. So Fred Van Vleet could be gone after this season. Gary Trent Jr., the same thing. And seemingly everybody wants OG Anunoby. So I think you could get a pretty good return for one all three of those guys to kind of figure out where you're going from there with Pascal Siakam.
So this was the spoiler alert from before, and I want to pick your brain on this. To me, the dream of dreams, if I'm Minnesota, if I can move Cat, I would love to get Van Vleet and Anunoby back. I'll grease the wheels however I have to in order to make that deal happen and move D'Angelo Russell to the bench as the sixth man. I know he may not re-sign due to that. I'm willing to take that risk. But give me that starting lineup of Van Vleet, Edwards, Anunoby, McDaniels, and Gobert, and let's go to work. And let's put D'Angelo Russell with that second unit and give him all the shots he wants. He plays with the second unit most of the time in real game situations anyway and does just fine. If I'm Toronto, I've got a star who's locked down. I've got two all-stars now up front in Towns and Siakam. I see what I can do with that. I take a little bit of a risk, but I see what Andrew Wiggins got when he moved into a stable situation. I'm going to take a bet that Nick Nurse can maybe reach Towns and progress him a little bit. It is a risk, absolutely. But I'm getting a guy for one that might walk in Van Vleet and one with Anunoby that I may have to move anyway.
Right. Toronto, I think more than any other team, subscribes to the positionless basketball realm that we live in now, where Siakam on most nights is playing center, and you have length. With the exception of Fred Van Vleet, you have length all over the floor. So you could see OG playing the 2 at times. You could see him playing the 4 at times. I don't know if Cat really fits that mold for Toronto. It's so tough to figure out Cat being on a team with another big guy. And I'm calling Siakam a big guy for Toronto because he is that for them. I like it from Minnesota's perspective, especially if they can find a way to keep Van Vleet long term. I think he's one of those great leaders. I think he is like a Chris Paul light in terms of leadership. And he's got the great shooting ability. I think he's just a winning player despite his stature, despite where he was drafted, all of that stuff. I think he brings a lot more to the table than he's given credit for. It's an interesting one. I like the Dame to Denver idea a little bit more than I do for Toronto's sake of getting Cat for those guys. But I think they're a team that I don't know that they're going to pay up for Gary Trent. I don't know that they're going to pay up for Fred Van Vleet. So if you can find some pieces that you like long term to trade those guys away for it, I think they make those kinds of moves.
If you are the Utah Jazz and Danny Ainge, and you and I have talked about this every time you've been on, but we talked with less of a ticking clock and more just about the individual players they could move. But now let's talk organizational standpoint. You are 27-27. You clearly went into the year hoping to not be this good. But at the same time, you are in playoff range, and Utah typically has been just fine logging playoff appearances year after year after year. If you're that front office, do you strip this down and ensure that you get bad enough to get in the Wembanyama sweepstakes at least a little bit, or some of these other guys that could be pretty decent? Or knowing that you've got some deck shuffling here and some interesting pieces, you could try to bring in a star using your capital that you have. You could also stand pat and do nothing and let this team continue to gel and keep looking at these guys going, who's long-term? What can we build on? Maybe we even have a better team next year based on strictly what we have, since it's a young roster.
So I think they're at a point now where if they were to make the playoffs, they're not doing any damage in the playoffs. I think that's very realistic. I think they probably all would tell you that to a man. if they were to tank from right now, I don't think they get low enough at this point to really get in the Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson conversations. So they're definitely in that middle ground. So what I do is you trade Mike Conley, you trade Kelly Olynyk. If you get something really good for Jordan Clarkson, you move him as well. I don't think there's going to be a huge trade for Utah anywhere, whether it's at this deadline. I would be trying to build draft capital because that is a team, that is a town where you're either drafting your star or you're trading for your star. You are not getting a free agent to go to Salt Lake City. I don't care how good the team is, really. I mean, when's the last marquee free agent that ever went to Utah? So I think Danny Ainge is astute enough to know his team's situation. So I think he's either trying to compile draft picks for them to use, which he did so great in Boston. To me, he didn't go the one extra step to really cash in on some of those deals and use some of that draft capital to where he was drafting the likes of the Peyton Pritchards and the Aaron Nesmiths of the world, who were fine.
Romeo Langford. Yeah.
Romeo Langford's a great example as well. They never truly cashed in a couple more of those picks to get another big name. But I think that's the route that he will end up going there, knowing what the realistic outcomes are for this season. So I don't even know that he could get great returns for Conley and Olynyk. I think you're probably looking at second rounders, whatever the case may be. And Conley's got a lot of money. So they would have to get some sort of veteran back, but keep the pieces. Walker Kessler's been great. Lauri Markkanen is an all-star. I can't believe I'm saying that, but and even Colin Sexton, I think, has got some capabilities there as a six-man kind of guy. So keep massaging around the pieces that you want to keep. And at some point, Danny Ainge will go swinging for the fences.
Any other teams on your list that maybe should do something here, or at least should be on the phones?
Memphis is the one. I don't know where they improve. I think they've been one of the teams in on OG Anunoby. It's one of those things where it will take a team who believes in some of their young talent, the Zaire Williamses, and I don't know even who else, Xavier Tillman, like those kinds of guys.
Santi Aldama, maybe.
Yes, those are the kinds of guys. They don't have a ton to offer up because I don't think they're willing to break up what they've got going. So it's going to be building around the fringes. But if you can compile a couple of guys and some draft picks and get on Anunoby, I think that's the realm they're in, which would be very beneficial for them, but isn't necessarily the sexiest move at the deadline. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I made the case too recently that Memphis should stand pat, continue to build what they've got, but I was not thinking of them in the Anunoby sweepstakes. There is enough there on the fringes of their roster, and they really have never gutted their draft capital, but those aren't going to be sexy high picks either, like you said. But if they could get in on that, I mean, adding Anunoby would be enormous. The defensive potential of that group and the fact that you add another starting caliber player and maybe bump one of their other starting caliber players to the second unit with that group instead is really, really intriguing. I would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
He fits perfectly. You go Ja, Bane, Anunoby, Jaren Jackson, and Steven Adams. I think that's a pretty formidable group there. Anunoby
Brooks in the second lineup. He can punch people in the groin from the bench.
We could do a whole nother show on him alone, but I digress. No, I mean, I think Anunoby is kind of this year's Jeremy Grant, where it's like, plug him into any team. He fits. He's versatile enough. He's still got upside. There's still like another level to him somewhere in there, which is super intriguing to see if he can tap into. I think he's just a great fit on so many rosters.
Two different teams, both start with W's. Want to pick your brain here. The Washington Wizards are in 9th, 24-27. They brought in Porzingis. They reshuffled the deck again. Brad Beal isn't going anywhere. Do you stand pat and continue to fight it out with what you got? Do you try to hit the reshuffle button? Golden State in 9th place in the Western Conference, 26-26, waiting for a switch to flip that just hasn't flipped back on yet. but do have a lot of young guys that were supposed to be stepping up into bigger roles this year. Some of them have been able to do it. Some of them have been very disappointing in doing that, but there still is upside attached with their names, the Jonathan Kumingas, James Wiseman's of the world, that sort of thing, Moses Moody. Does Golden State make some deals here, maybe to bring in some veteran help, knowing that it's going to be a much more painful fall when the dynasty group is done, but you got to act now, and they're not ready to act now after 2/3 of a season.
That's a very delicate situation, and something that was brought to my attention this week that is making the rounds, I think, on radio and everywhere. Bob Myers is in the last year of his deal and does not have a contract extension worked out or anything. So does he re-up with them after the season? Does he decide to do something else? That could lead to everything we need to know about the situation with the Warriors. They are the epitome of dynasty, long-term success, well-run teams that aren't just thinking of the present, but also looking to the future. I would have my reservations that they would truly go after somebody else and give away the Moody's, the Kumingas, the Wisemans there. I just see, like,
even if you could somehow get back a Kevin Durant or somebody near the top of the heap.
Yes, there's enough equity in that organization to where if they went the next 10, 20 years without a title, like, their fans would be okay. It's like a Bulls fan. They haven't won a title since Jordan was there. And it's like, you know what? I've had enough for 3 lifetimes of championships. So what can you really say as a Bulls fan? But here's the thing. Steph Curry walks into Bob Myers or Steve Kerr's office and says, go for it. That, I think, is the one voice that could trump any plans that the organization has long term. If the vets are like, we're good to do this one more time, and the team feels like, hey, if we can get somebody else, we've got a shot. I just don't know where their heads are at in terms of, do they feel they're legitimate contenders despite the record, despite the injuries, or are they getting the sense that, maybe they're getting a little old? And like Jordan Poole, he's part of that next version of the Warriors. But yeah, there's certainly a case to be made for trying to maximize what you can while Steph Curry is in your lineup, for sure.
There also is the variable of the Draymond Green contract and whether he's going to be a long-term piece there. If somehow he's not, he could become trade capital. There certainly are a lot of teams who would take a swing at him at any point.
That was not pun intended, was it?
Double entendre. Only after I said it did I realize. But, that also becomes part of the calculus of, all right, are we going to let Green walk? In which case, let's keep these young guys around and continue to really elevate them. Are we unsure with Green? Maybe we kick the tires a little bit on the trade market and see if there's something. Or are we convinced that this is the group? Green is still part of the core. He's got to be there. Then maybe you start to look at those young guys and you do a win now type of move. I don't know. I think you can probably play through the end of this season trying to toe both lines and trying to decide which way you're going to go, but you run the high risk of greatly diminishing the upside perception of Kuminga, Wiseman, some of these other guys. If you get all the way to the end of this season, the Warriors flame out in the first round or flame out in the play-in, those guys never stepped up. Now all of a sudden you've lost a huge bargaining chip where the unknown is still out there and people can talk themselves into positive thinking for good reason, because we've seen flashes from all of those players.
I was listening to the radio this morning, actually, and one of your Minnesota boys, Sam Mitchell, was talking about how there's enough tape on these guys now. Maybe not Wiseman, because he's been so injured over the last year or two, but there's enough tape on these guys where NBA teams have built a scouting report on them, whether they really like them, whether they don't. And he made a great point. not everybody can play for Golden State. It's not a plug and play system.
Mm-hmm.
It really takes some grooming to adapt to that style of play. To me, it is the most beautiful style of basketball in the NBA.
Agreed.
But it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. Do we know that it's not for Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, or James Wiseman? We don't, honestly. But they probably have a decent idea whether those guys can grow into that system or not. We've seen flashes from Kuminga. We've seen next to nothing from Wiseman, and we've seen somewhere in between those two from Moses Moody to this point. But
it really is analogous to the Spurs in the Tim Duncan era, bringing their different guys in and cycling through, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like, on their own, the Tony Parkers and Manu Ginobilis were not stars in the way we think of stars, but they were stars in that system. And so, like, if they've assessed it and said, you know what, I don't know that these guys are really going to fully blossom in our system, you run the risk of saying of a Lauri Markkanen, where two teams have given up on him in successive years, and now he's an all-star in Utah. You run the risk of those guys really turning into something with another organization, but it's very, very delicate. I don't think you can say we're not going for it if you're Golden State, but I don't know if they are ready to jump in all the way into a trade market scenario.
Matt Dagostino from Turner Sports, NBA TV, NBA.com, joining me here on Basketball by Association. Matt, we're winding down on time, so let's run the list of any remaining players that we haven't mentioned yet, maybe on other teams that deserve a change of scenery. Maybe it's veterans on bad teams that need to go somewhere else, or young guys that could blossom with a bigger opportunity, that sort of thing, the proverbial one-offs here.
Yeah, I mean, San Antonio, Jakob Poeltl, I think he could be helpful to a team in a playoff run. They're obviously not going anywhere. I think he deserves a shot somewhere to prove he's really good. And I think he could find, if he got the right fit, I think he could really find a scenario like that. Buddy Hield, I think, I think Indiana, they've said Miles Turner isn't going anywhere after he signed the extension, but maybe it's Buddy Hield that they try to do something with. Obviously, his shooting is going to be helpful. He's a guy who's a good enough shooter that could win you a game or two in the playoffs by himself. Just, he catches fire and that's it. So those kinds of
he's
situations.
Perfect in the J.R. Smith role, minus all of the J.R. Smith stuff that came along with it. But he
may actually know what the score is and the time remaining in a game.
Oh, man.
I mean, those are kind of the guys, and I know Indiana's still on the periphery of the playoff scenarios, so I don't know whether they're in that mode or not. Kyle Kuzma, I don't know whether Washington thinks they're in it long term. I know teams would love to get Kuzma on a rental, a guy who will be a free agent who, again, he's a guy who scored 40 points in a game last month. I don't know what he brings outside of the scoring as much, but he's an offensive threat that a team that has another couple of guys on the roster could use.
If I'm Washington, he's maybe, I don't want to say the one guy, but he's at the very top of the list of the guys I don't trade at this point.
Okay.
I take a look at him for another season, maybe even two, because Porzingis is Porzingis at this point, and the Wizards' record is what it is. There's a lot of other, guys like Denny Avdia where you could see their career going either way. Is it really a needle mover? But I feel like Kuzma is the guy who, in a couple of different situations now, has shown the ability to be productive. We don't know whether his teams are winning teams, but Washington is another one of those places where free agents just don't go to. And Kuzma looks like he has all-star potential and second wheel type of potential around Bradley Beal. Is it on a winning team? I don't know, but I don't want to pull the plug on that yet.
The thing with him is he'll be a free agent at the end of the year. So if they think they can re-sign him, if they think he's interested in that, you see all of the social media inferring that he wants to go back to Los Angeles. I think the last time he was there to play, he said it feels good to be home, and everybody, there he goes. He's going back. If Washington thinks they could keep him, I would absolutely try to keep him. I think he's definitely a piece. But if they feel like he's not long for Washington, I would try and see what they could get for him.
Bojan Bogdanovic in Detroit is someone. I live in Michigan. I go to Pistons games multiple times a year. I see a lot of him this season. He's still got it. He's the only guy who knows what he's doing every night offensively in Detroit at this point. He's 33 years old. He's not a game changer, but he still is a flamethrower. If he's your fourth, fifth guy on the roster, is the perfect setup for him. Detroit has supposedly said that they want to keep him because
that's the interesting thing to me.
He's been good in the locker room. The guys love him. The organization loves him. The fans have really embraced him in Detroit. In another lost season, he's been one of the lone bright spots where everybody gets excited in the arena when he touches the ball. He's got some street cred in Detroit, which is cool. But at the same time, that has to be empty talk, because next year, maybe you get Cade Cunningham healthy back for the first time in his career. Maybe you get Wembanyama. You've got Jalen Duren. You've got Jaden Ivey. You've got pieces. Bogdanovic doesn't move the needle in that unless he is an amazing locker room guy, but you've got more draft capital that you can get back for Bogdanovic at this point in his career, which you will not be able to touch in another year or two. You have to sell high on Bogey at this point, right?
I mean, the only explanation is he is just a great locker room guy, which I don't find hard to believe. But yes, I mean, everything with that team points to long-term, points to rebuild. And he doesn't fit that plan, it doesn't seem like. But if he's helping with the young guys, if he's teaching them how to be pros, there's value in that. I just don't know what extent that value, carries out in the locker room with them. But they are certainly still interested in keeping him when everybody's telling them, trade, please trade him.
You could make the case that Detroit is so young and about to get so young that another draft pick or two thrown into the mix, and it's not going to be a world-beating draft pick for Bogdanovic, or whatever other young player they get back. Sometimes you can reach critical mass on having too many young guys and not enough sane veterans in that locker room. But I thought that's what Corey Joseph was supposed to be. That's why he's still there in Detroit. There's a couple of other guys hanging around in that locker room that are there for one purpose, and it's to be a mentor. So if Bogdanovic has to stay, then you got to be looking at the lesser deals for Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel, two other veterans who could help playoff teams, at least as a rotation level guy. I don't understand this idea of Detroit standing pat, but I also don't want to spend any more time on the Pistons because it's just a weird team. Any other players that you want to mention? We have to give the annual honorable mentions to two other guys who should have been gone a long time ago: T. Ross in Orlando and Eric Gordon in Houston.
Yes,
they're still there. And you talk about feeling like you've done something for 5 years in a row. It feels like 5 years for both of those guys that they should have been
and
traded.
If there was any question whether Eric Gordon can still play, when Jalen Green's been out here the last couple of weeks, Eric Gordon's putting in 20 a night. He's still got that potential there. So, that's another team that should be in full rebuild mode and trying to get something for him. But he could definitely help a contender somewhere along the way.
If you're the Lakers and you're really convinced that you need a Buddy Hield, Miles Turner thing, which to me, I don't understand why the Pacers would even entertain that for Russell Westbrook. I get how you can talk yourself into it, but I still don't understand it. But if you need a Buddy Hield, can't you get a lot of that for probably an even cheaper price? You talk about those margin moves to bring in an Eric Gordon or to bring in a Terrence Ross or to try to snag both of those guys. The asking price can't be high at this point, right?
No, I'm trying to think. So the Lakers gave up 2 second-rounders to get Hachimura. I honestly don't know how many more picks they can trade at this point. They have traded so much to get the roster that they've had that, that's why when they were, rumored to be going after Turner and Hield, the draft picks are 2027 and 2029. That's an eternity in the basketball world. And that's really the best that they can give up because they can't give up anything else before then. So I don't know. Yes. If you can trade some more second rounders to get an Eric Gordon or a Terrence Ross, sure, by all means. What are those going to end up being? Once once in a generation or, once in a decade, you're getting a Draymond Green in the second round. But I just don't know what they've got left to really offer at this point.
Last question before I let you go. Who needs a deal at the deadline more? The Miami Heat or the Dallas Mavericks? They're both sitting middle of their conferences. They are competitive. They are good teams. They are going to be a tough out in the first round, but you don't see much more ceiling for either except for Luka Magic, which could take you a little bit further down the Western Conference standings in a place that has a lot of parity. But who needs a deal in order to keep trying to get where they're trying to go?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to say Dallas. That supporting cast could use some improvement for sure. I think a trade for them could be the difference between being the 10th seed and being the 4th seed by the end of this whole regular season shakeout with things so tight in the West. Miami, the thing I don't like about both of these teams is I don't know what they're giving up. Like, I don't think people are in love with Duncan Robinson at $18 million a year right now.
Not anymore.
I don't know. They just don't have great. Miami's usually loaded with contracts and draft picks that they can send away. And it's almost like they have a cheat code for getting the guy when they need the guy.
Yep.
And I don't think they can get that guy at this point. I don't know that Dallas can either. But I think if Dallas is going to withstand some of that shakeup in the Western Conference, they'll need something here at the deadline.
Matt D'Agostino from NBA TV, NBA.com, Turner Sports has been my guest here on Basketball by Association. Find us on YouTube if you want the video version. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff. If you want the audio-only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Matt, thank you so much. And let's start to spread that Dame Lillard to Denver sort of thing.
I love it. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it myself. I'm a little mad at myself, but when it happens, all the credit goes to Joel. Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody. The Mo Cheeks episode is in the books, 133. Archie Shea will be returning next week and will be post-trade deadline at that time. Hopefully we'll have some fallout to sift through. Have a good one, everybody.